Hi, friends. This is Dr. Arpita Gupta Dipalma, and you're listening to my podcast, From Pissed Off to Poised. This show is for busy women physicians and professionals just like you who are ready to take control of their emotions while learning how to excel in juggling all the things they are responsible for in life. It's for overextended mamas who are trying to figure out how to work smarter, not harder. It's for multitasking women who are tired of playing the role of the angry and resentful air traffic controller, who simply want to learn how to create a life that is more calm, intentional, and joyful for themselves. My goal is to help you learn how to eliminate the overwhelm and maintain your composure in high-stress situations that you face with the demands in your day-to-day life. Because I get you guys, this was totally me. You are not alone. I invite you to embark on your journey of transformation with me. Enjoy the listen. Hi guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining me on another episode of From Pissed Off to Poised. Today, I want to talk about the concept that I've kind of mentioned a couple of times briefly in the past few episodes, but this is the concept that anger is a secondary emotion. And although at times anger might be your primary emotion, most commonly anger is a secondary emotion. And what I mean by that is anger is an emotion that we choose to feel because we'd rather feel it instead of feeling some other negative emotion that is really at the heart of what's going on for us. And so today we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about how we can kind of figure out what those underlying emotions are that we are not comfortable feeling so that we can start to solve for how we want to show up each day. And I mentioned when we feel anger, it feels more powerful to us than when we feel any other form of pain with the other emotions that we have. And it becomes a learned habit over time when we have recurrent exposures to the things in our environment that bring up those other negative emotions. And this is how anger becomes a familiar, automatic, and comfortable neural pathway. It becomes this response that is just simply easier for us to do, even though we regret our reactions at the end, after the fact, when we've shown up that way. So it's important for us to notice that anger might just be your way of your mind's buffering to avoid the feelings of overwhelm, hurt, disappointment, shame, worry, loss of control, failure, urgency, jealousy, low self-worth. I can go on and on and on. There are so many other negative emotions in our world because life is 50-50. In order to have the positive emotions in life, we also have to have the negative ones. And what's happened with anger oftentimes is that we have chosen to avoid feeling any of these other negative emotions because the world and our environment around us tells us that we should only be feeling good all of the time. So this is how anger has become a way for us to compensate, to circumvent feeling that other negative emotion that we might be experiencing in any other situation in our life. So I want you to look at this graphic that my lovely mini-me created for me. It's a glacier graphic, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And it essentially is a picture of an iceberg. And at the top, above the water in the iceberg, is anger. And then if you go underneath the water, where you really wouldn't be able to notice or see from above, you have all the different components, all the pieces of the base of the iceberg that are made up of all the other negative emotions that we could experience in our life. It's really helpful to identify sometimes some of the other emotions that you might be having. So definitely take a minute to look that up in the show notes. So I want you to ask yourself, what is your anger really covering up? Have you noticed instances in which you are really quick to choose anger rather than sitting and being present with the other negative emotion that you might be experiencing then? Anger is often a cover-up for a fear that we have, including the fear of experiencing these other negative emotions. Another common emotion I've seen in my clients in association to anger is resentment. Resentment is a common negative emotion that sustains the anger habit. It's the feeling of unhappiness over being wronged or hurt. It's the feeling we get when we have unmet expectations, when we hang our emotions on the expectations that people are going to do, say, or behave the way we need them to behave, and then they don't. So when we continue to resent, we continue to give our power away to what or who we are resenting. And yet we are ultimately the only ones suffering from the feeling of resentment. They have no idea that that's going on for us. So it's important to notice when you have resentment towards someone or something and how that resentment is settling in your body and ultimately how it's showing up for you. And especially if it's showing up as anger. Because there are different ways people express their anger. And it's going to be important for you to notice how you tend to express your anger. So I'm going to talk about some of the most common ways people show or express their emotion of anger. Number one, they react to it. And this is very common. This is very easy to identify. This is like when we vent, when we think the anger feels good because of the sense of justification and that adrenaline rush or release that it gives us. It's the discharge. But this sense of release, this sense of rush is only temporary. And when we vent to let off that steam, it only reinforces that habit of anger because that's when you get that dopa hit. So some people will show up and they'll yell at their kids, or they'll scream at the Verizon guy on the phone, or they'll throw something in the office against the wall because they're unhappy. That's a reaction. That's their immediate discharge to let off that steam. And ultimately, it doesn't serve us. Other people react by shutting down completely and walling themselves off when they're angry. Their reaction includes avoiding all interactions in the heat of that anger. This is very common for people who oftentimes maybe saw their parents have very angry outbursts as children, and they have learned that maybe this isn't a right way to show up, and so they do the complete opposite. This is like when we cue that angry dad who loves to dish out the silent treatment when they're upset with you. So reacting with anger can look different, and everybody can have their own way of showing up with it, how they react to it. So I want you to just be mindful of that. So the second way we can express our anger is to resist it. And this is when we repress the anger. It's like we have this fire that's continuing to burn inside of us. It's exhausting us. It's depleting us. It's burning us down inside. And that's leading to other physical manifestations that can be harmful. So this is why people who tend to just push away their anger or not acknowledge it and kind of stuff it down show up with physical manifestations such as headaches, stomach aches, cardiac issues, et cetera, et cetera. Because when we resist an emotion, any emotion, it's like pushing a beach ball under a body of water. And I use this analogy a lot because I think it makes clear sense. When we're pushing that beach ball underwater, we know it's not going to go away. It's not going to involute and disintegrate. It's going to push itself back up out of the water, oftentimes with more intensity and more force down the road. And so essentially, we're just perpetuating it when we push that anger down, when we resist feeling the anger. So that's the second way. The third way we can express our anger is when we just simply avoid feeling it. And this is when people kind of have realized that they get addicted to the rush of adrenaline and the temporary sense of power that anger is providing them. And this leads to other addictions, such as drugs, such as shopping, such as gambling, sex, any of the other things that they could do instead when they're angry to help them feel better. And when we use these substances or use these other outlets to avoid feeling that anger, that leads to that addiction because it helps us feel good when we know the anger doesn't feel as great. So we tend to jump to that instead. And this is when use of these substances, use of these addictions begin to remove our inhibitions. And this is when it can lead to violence or abuse and outwardly reactions that are out of proportion or out of control. Studies have shown that reacting and resisting to angry feelings can also lead to an increased risk of developing heart disease. I think that makes sense, right? Heart attacks, it's obvious that the amount of stress and the tension that we're creating for ourselves increases our cortisol levels, and that sets us up for more problems down the road. When we buffer with other activities to avoid anger, it increases the overall sum of total negative emotions that we're creating in our world. So when we are drinking those glasses of wine at night because we had a tough day and people really ticked us off, or when we're eating 2 tubs of ice cream because that's the way I'm going to cope with all these jerks in the world who did me wrong today. Or when we lose money because we're shopping excessively or gambling because that's how we're solving for avoiding feeling the anger. Any of these things that we can do ultimately lead to more negative emotions down the road because we don't want to do it. We regret doing it. It's ultimately creating more negativity for us on the other end of it. We're creating a vicious cycle by doing the buffering, by choosing something that isn't ultimately serving us, landing in that space, and then afterwards feeling worse about it, and then going back again to that same thing to help us feel better. So the only way to stop the cycle is to build your awareness around what is activating you, and then learn to allow and process through those emotions. And I'm going to cover this with you in the next few modules, but processing emotions is so powerful. And I really, really have learned so much from my teacher, Bev Aaron, about processing emotions because it's all tied together. When we don't allow the emotions to be there and we don't work through them, it essentially becomes embodied, just like the traumas we talked about. And when these emotions become embodied in our systems and we don't work through it, it ultimately leads to physical demise. So there's an anger exercise that I want you to work through right now. And this is something that you can just take notes on it and do it whenever you have time later. But it's referred to as the look beneath anger exercise. And this is in Heart Math when they have a book called Transforming Your Anger. And within this book, this exercise is one way that you can use to help kind of explore what's going on underneath your anger. So the first step of this exercise is to write down the ways you react when you're angry. So think back to situations or circumstances when you showed up angry and how did you show up? How did you react? Did you buffer with one of the other things? Did you just resist it and push it down? Did you actually have an outwardly reaction? Pay attention to what your anger looks like. Number 2, I want you to look at that feelings graphic that I referred to, the iceberg, and ask yourself, your inner knowing, your heart, which one of these other emotions, or it might be multiple of them, are you covering up with your anger? Ask yourself, am I feeling hurt? Am I jealous? Am I disappointed? Am I resentful? What emotion are you choosing to maybe avoid feeling by jumping to anger instead? And then I want you to ask yourself, what are you afraid of with regards to these underlying emotions? And lastly, what do I really want with regards to the situation that you're encountering? If you could be present with that negative emotion underlying the anger and work through it, how would you solve for it? What would make it better? And then the third step to this look beneath anger exercise is to think of an old emotional memory that comes up for you that activates your anger. And I want you to ask yourself here, what's going on in this situation? What's wrong, love? What's bothering me here? This is where it's super important to show up with compassion and kindness and vulnerability with ourselves. Because if we can do this and just be curious and be honest with ourselves and upfront with what's going on underneath, we oftentimes will find that it's not anger. It's really the emotions, the other negative, hurtful, painful emotions underneath that we're afraid to feel and afraid to solve for. So for now, I want you to just be aware of how sneaky anger can be and how tricky anger can be, because it has become, for many of us, more comfortable to feel anger compared to feeling hurt, shame, disappointment, any of those other painful negative emotions that I've mentioned. And after having your anger reaction repeatedly, it makes sense why it's become your comfortable go-to. It's become an easy habit because in the grand scheme of things, anger now feels a little bit better. It's predictable than feeling any of these other painful negative emotions. And even though you've noticed that you regret the way you show up after the fact when you're angry, this regret can be the first step of building awareness around that specific anger activator. It can be the first step to noticing where you want to make a change. So I want you to consider this a gift that you may now want to explore. This was a great episode, and this is one of my favorite areas to cover with anger. It's regarding processing emotions, exploring and understanding the underlying emotions, and then processing them with grace and love and vulnerability. So I am looking forward to moving on to the next episode next week. We are going to talk with one of my favorite teachers, Bev Aaron, about processing emotions. So make sure you tune in next week. You're not going to want to miss it. Take care, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of From Pissed Off to Poised. Remember, transformation is a journey, not a destination. So enjoy the ride. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review From Pissed Off to Poised on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback supports my mission to get this podcast out to help other women physicians and professionals like you on their path to creating a more peaceful life with more intention and more joy. I enjoy reading every message I get with your input and feedback on my journey, so keep them coming. And if you have a friend who might enjoy the listen, please share this episode and share with them. Lastly, if you want to learn more about my coaching programs and course offerings, check out my website at www.thoughtworkmd.com. Feel free to reach out to me to learn more about investing in yourself through one-to-one coaching so you can start living the life you've always wanted. This show is for general educational and entertainment purposes only. Life coaching is not a substitute for therapy or medical treatment.